Hello, welcome to the Toonshire Talkers podcast. And today we're going to be discussing the book To Kill a Mockingbird and how race affects it. So one of the biggest topics in To Kill a Mockingbird was obviously racism. Throughout the story, what I want to talk about is how racism affects the story. A lot of the racism that was in the story relates around Tom Robinson, a black man in the South, whose trial was the talk of the town. He was accused of raping a white woman named Mayella Ewell. This incident turns the whole town against him. He becomes a victim of racism because of the color of his skin. Everyone believes in Mayella's side of the story except Atticus. Although there is no proof of his crime, he faces hate from the community as well as the court. And this event in the book really showed Jem and Scout the racist stance of the community. Another incident in the story that I would like to talk about is when Atticus decides to defend Tom. This causes backlash from the whole community, not just on Atticus, but on Jem and Scout. In Chapter 9, Scout's classmate Cecil Jacob announces that Scout's father is defending a Negro, which causes a brawl between the two, which broke a promise she made to Atticus. This incident shows what the community thinks of black people and shows Scout the community's idea of black people. So, how do you guys feel about this? So for me, when I first started reading To Kill a Mockingbird, I noticed the race in the beginning with how they were just treating them, and it was kind of around the time when slaves were still around. And I felt like the whole trial thing it really showed Scout and Jem what their community was actually really about.
Yeah, and so in the book, it was kind of like this scenario going on in your head, and earlier today when we watched the movie or the clip where it's the actual trial and it's explaining his side of the story and his side of the story and all the evidence that was found, and it was really interesting how their opinions didn't change even though it didn't make any sense. He couldn't have raped her because there was no evidence pointing him towards the actual offense, and all the evidence was basically just a white woman's word against a black man's.
Yeah, and I felt like when Scout and Jem were in the room, that really stood out to them.
It was really eye-opening seeing how the evidence of the accusation of rape was so open-ended and left with question, and Tom Robinson's was a solid thing of evidence, and Atticus helped explain that there was no possible way that this could have happened. It was just really eye-opening to see how race really affected courts and people's lives back then.
Yeah, I really agree with them.
Do you want to move on?
Yeah.
Okay. So I was sitting in class the other day, and I was thinking about racism in the same time period as To Kill a Mockingbird. And I thought, how would it have changed my childhood? And how would I be a different person if I grew up in that era? The racism is so harsh in the book, and it's crazy to think of some of the things that happened in that time period. I cringe when I see little things compared to the Jim Crow period and today. I also think, what if I grew up and I was racist? That would have been very likely that I was racist to some extent, unless I grew up with a father like Atticus, which chances were unlikely. A lot of people then didn't really have respect for other races. What do you guys think? How do you guys think you would have changed if you grew up in this period?
Obviously, it mentions in the book that there are lots of kids who think the same way as the adults, and that's probably from their parental
guidance.
Yeah, parental guidance, or and if I think I probably would still be the same person as I am today because my parents are still the same. But if I think life would be a lot harder if I thought one way and people thought another, because Scout got teased because her dad was defending Tom Robinson.
Yeah, I agree with that. I feel like almost around that time period, it would be hard not to be racist because that was what was normal. Like, and it wasn't just normal to some people. It was normal. It was in the law. There was laws against black people. It was just the normal, and like it's almost hard not to see yourself being racist in that time period.
Yeah, and if you like did have a parent like Atticus who was against racism and thought that everybody should be treated fairly, it would be really hard to be a kid and have a bunch of people that are racist just like hammering you with a bunch of questions on why you guys love other races and why you aren't normal.
Yeah, I totally agree with that.
Okay, so I got the question, what is modern racism and how is it similar to the book? And racism, just like in the book, is something that our society has struggled with today. It is the only difference from then and now is that we are more aware of the problem and have tried in the past to solve it. However, it is still a big problem in our society today, even if it is not as severe. An example would be ethnocentrism, which is where one race or society think they are better than that of another. A simpler way to put it would be like a big ego. And given the fact that it is still a big problem, just not as bad and not as commonly discussed, doesn't say that it's still something that we should try and solve, even if it is still a big problem.
Yeah, and I would like to, I feel about how that is. People aren't more of they're more racist on the inside. They won't put it out there, but they still have a prejudice towards some person. And it could be from a past experience or from what their parents told them. And I feel like through time, it will thin out and eventually it won't matter, but we still struggle with race and racism now, I feel like.
Yeah, because in the 21st century, it's not as big of a problem, it's not commonly discussed, but it's still every once in a while, it'll pop up on the news, some kind of attack or just, it's still a big problem.
And I think that's a problem because there are people who have prejudiced thoughts and they just keep it to themselves and keep it in for such a long time, and they don't talk to anybody about it and how to be a more loving person to other people. And that outbreak, it just happens and then they lose control. I'm not trying to give them an alibi for it, their actions, but I think that people just need to be talked to about accepting others for their races and stuff.
Yeah, I agree with that. We actually have an emailer from one of our viewers, so if you want to read that off.
Yeah, so the email says, how has the book changed your view on racism and the 1900s?
So, for me, how the book changed my view on racism was that it really made me look at it and kind of dissect it, because at the beginning, it's kind of you think of racism as just one strict thing, prejudice against another group, but in the book it shows you different forms of how Scout, they didn't even really know much about black people, but they still had that prejudice at the beginning of the story, and it really taught me taught me about the times and how it used to be, and also shows me where we have come from.
While reading the book, I was very surprised to see that people were prejudiced against people of different social classes, people with more money or less money, and how that kind of gave them an advantage over some people. And it was crazy to think about how we were then and how far we've come as a society today.
So yeah, my opinion on racism hasn't always been the greatest. I don't like it at all. I don't like the idea of someone judging people just because of nothing they did, even if they haven't done anything, just because of what their beliefs are or how they look. And honestly, reading this book and watching part of the movie, it only made my opinions worse. It's still not fair.
Yeah, and I totally agree with that. I feel it's kind of a good way to show where we've come from, I feel like.
Yeah, and how far we've come as a society and as a human species.
And we can still go a lot further.
Yeah, we can still make changes, so yeah. this is the end of the podcast. Have a wonderful day.